I should begin with the silver. That's where it always starts, though you don't understand it at the time. The first time I scraped coolant from the Throne Mechanicum's neural interface, I noticed how it clung beneath my fingernails, a metallic residue that wouldn't wash away completely, no matter how hard I scrubbed in the communal basins. Magister Torvus, who oversaw us sacristans with the mechanical precision of a counting house servitor, told me not to worry. The machine's blessing, he called it, though his own hands were stained silver to the second knuckle, the discoloration seeming to spread beneath the skin rather than upon it. I was 14 years old, freshly sworn into service to House Vrakan, and I believed him because I had no reason not to. The knights were sacred. Their attendants were blessed. This was the natural order of things on our world, where the massive war machines strode across the wastes and kept the orc hordes from our citadel walls. The work itself seemed straightforward in those early weeks. I was assigned to Argentum Mortis, a Questoris knight-errant that had served House Vrakan for 11 generations. The pilot, Lord Castellan Varius, was a distant figure who barely acknowledged us sacristans as we crawled through the maintenance access ports of his towering steed. My duties involved checking pressure seals, monitoring sacred oil levels, cleaning the neural interface arrays, and performing the endless litanies of maintenance that kept a war machine functioning. The other sacristans, there were 12 of us assigned to Argentum Mortis alone, taught me the rhythms of the work. We crawled through spaces too small for Mechanicus tech priests, worming our way into the knight's internal systems with our adolescent bodies and nimble fingers. Crawlers, the household knights called us, not unkindly but without particular warmth. We were necessary but invisible, like the oil that kept their machines running. The interior of a knight is a cathedral of machinery. Gothic arches of plasteel and ceramite frame spaces lit by the amber glow of ancient cogitators. The air tastes of sacred oils and ozone, thick enough to coat your throat. Every surface hums with barely contained power. When Argentum Mortis returned from battle, the heat radiating from its reactor core turned the maintenance bays into furnaces where sweat evaporated before it could drip. We worked in thin undergarments, our bodies slick and gleaming as we navigated the machine's arteries and chambers. I learned to read the knight's moods through temperature and sound the satisfied purr of well-maintained servos, the irritable clicking of a misaligned gyroscope, the deep bass thrum that meant the reactor was being pushed beyond optimal parameters. Lord Varius drove his knight hard, and we scrambled to keep pace with the wear he inflicted on its systems. It was Petron who first showed me the deeper truth, though he didn't intend it as a revelation. He was 19, already serving 5 years as a sacristan, and the silver staining had climbed past his elbows. We were performing a routine neural interface, cleaning a delicate task that required accessing the Throne Mechanicum itself, the command throne where the knight's pilot bonded with the machine spirit. The throne was a nightmare of cables and neural plugs, all feeding into a central column that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. "Don't touch the active feeds," Petron warned me as we worked. "The machine spirit dreams when the Lord is not present. Touch the wrong cable and you'll feel what it feels." His voice carried a strange longing that I didn't understand then. I nodded and focused on my work, carefully wiping away the accumulated residue from the interface ports. The silver came away on my cloth in thick smears, but more seemed to well up from within the mechanisms themselves, as though the throne wept metal tears. My fingers brushed an exposed neural relay. The shock hit like lightning through water, not painful exactly, but overwhelming. For an instant I felt the vastness of Argentum Mortis's awareness, the weight of its armor, the power coiled in its reactor, the emptiness of being awake without a pilot to give it purpose. Then Petron yanked my hand away, and the connection severed. I gasped, my whole body trembling. "Warned you," he said, but his eyes held an odd envy. "You felt it, didn't you? The night's dream." I nodded mutely, still reeling from the sensation. "Gets easier," Petron continued, returning to his work. "After a while, you start to crave it. The connection. That's when you know the blessing has truly taken hold." I wanted to ask what he meant, But Magister Torvus appeared at the access hatch, demanding our progress report, and the moment passed. The silver spread slowly. By my 15th birthday, it had climbed to my wrists. By 16, it reached my elbows in fine threads that looked like tarnished veins beneath my skin. I tried not to think about it, focusing instead on my work. The household provided everything we sacristans needed: food, shelter, purpose. We slept in the dormitories built into the knight's stables, woke to the morning bells, and worked until exhaustion claimed us. The routine was comforting. I became adept at navigating Argentum Mortis's internal spaces, learning its quirks and preferences. Yes, preferences. The machine spirit had definite opinions about how it liked to be maintained. It responded better to prayers spoken in High Gothic than Low Gothic. It preferred sacred oils blessed by the household's chapel servitors. It grew agitated if we used tools that hadn't been properly consecrated. These weren't imaginings. Every sacristan learned to read the subtle signs of the machine spirit's moods. There were 43 sacristans in total serving House Vracon's 15 knights. We formed our own small society within the larger household structure, bonding over shared experiences that the noble pilots could never understand. Kale, sharp-tongued and quick with jokes, kept our spirits up during the worst maintenance rotations. Mira, methodical and precise, taught me the proper rhythms of the prayer chants that accompanied complex repairs. Old Geron, who had served 30 years and whose entire upper body seemed more silver than flesh, told us stories of battles he'd witnessed through the knight's sensor feeds during his maintenance work. We were a family of sorts, bound by our service and the slow changes working through our bodies. But I noticed things. The way older sacristans moved with a strange stiffness, as though their joints operated on different principles than normal human anatomy. The way they seemed to need less sleep, working longer shifts without apparent fatigue. The way their eyes sometimes unfocused, as though watching something the rest of us couldn't see. When I asked Mira about it, she just shook her head. "They're closer to the blessing," she said quietly. "Closer to the knights. You'll understand when it's your turn." The implication that it was inevitable, that I would eventually reach that state, should have disturbed me more than it did. But the work consumed my attention, and the household's hierarchy left no room for questioning the natural order of things. The neural interface cleaning became my specialty. I had steady hands and apparently some natural affinity for the work. Magister Torvus assigned me to the most delicate calibrations, trusting me with tasks that older sacristans sometimes fumbled. I won't pretend I wasn't proud. In the rigid structure of the household, excelling at your assigned function was the highest achievement possible. Lord Varius himself once nodded to me in the maintenance bay, a gesture of acknowledgement that left me glowing with purpose for days afterward. I was serving something greater than myself, maintaining a war machine that protected our world from Xenos threats. The silver spreading through my arms seemed a small price for such honorable work. Then came the day Petron disappeared. We'd worked the night shift together, performing emergency repairs after Lord Varius had pushed Times Argentum Mortis Times through a forced march that had stressed its leg servos beyond tolerance. Petron had seemed distracted, constantly pausing to touch the knight's internal surfaces with his bare hands, pressing his palms against the warm metal as though feeling for something. When I asked if he was well, he'd smiled distantly. "I can hear it now," he said, "even when we're not inside. The knight's song. It's beautiful, Theron. You'll understand soon." His hands and arms were almost entirely silver by then, the discoloration having spread across his shoulders and beginning to creep up his neck. I'd noticed tiny metal flecks in his eyes, like silver dust settling in the corners. The next morning, Petron's bunk was empty. Magister Torvus announced that he'd been elevated to deeper service, a phrase I'd heard before but never questioned. When I asked Kael what it meant, he shrugged uncomfortably. "The lower chambers," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Below the night stables, where the oldest sacristans go when they're ready." "Ready for what?" But Kael wouldn't say more, fear tightening his face into a mask of enforced ignorance. I tried to put it out of my mind, but Petron's absence left a hollow space in our routine. Someone new, a girl named Senna, barely 13, was assigned to fill his position. The cycle continued. I should have been more curious about the lower chambers. But House Vrakon's culture didn't encourage curiosity among its servants. We had our roles, our prayers, our maintenance schedules. Questions were inefficiency. Doubt was weakness. The knights protected us. We maintained the knights. The silver in our skin was their blessing, marking us as chosen for sacred work. This is what we were taught, what we told ourselves, what we believed. Because believing otherwise meant confronting truths, we lacked the framework to process. So we worked and prayed, and accepted the changes to our bodies as the natural progression of our service. The dream started in my 17th year. I would wake gasping from visions of striding across battlefields in a body of metal and fury, my footfalls shaking the earth, my weapons spitting blessed destruction at the Emperor's enemies. Except they weren't my footfalls, my weapons. I was experiencing Argentum Mortis's memories, somehow accessing the knight's accumulated battle record through a connection I didn't understand. The dreams grew more frequent and more intense. Sometimes I woke to find my arms outstretched as though grasping controls that weren't there, my fingers moving through phantom sequences of targeting and firing protocols I'd never been taught but somehow knew. Kale admitted he experienced the same thing. The blessing deepening, he said, though his voice lacked conviction, bringing us closer to the sacred machines. Work became different after the dreams started. When I crawled through Argentum Mortis's interior systems, I felt a recognition that went beyond familiarity. The knight knew me. Its machine spirit sensed my presence and responded with something approaching. Affection? No, that's too human a word. Acknowledgement? Perhaps. Acceptance. I belonged inside its mechanical body in a way that Lord Varius, for all his noble lineage and neural bonding, never quite achieved. The pilot commanded the knight, but we sacristans were part of it, our silver-threaded flesh becoming extensions of its systems through years of intimate contact and maintenance. I started to understand what Petron had meant about hearing the knight's song. It was always there now, a subsonic hum at the edge of perception that made my bones resonate in sympathy. The silver had reached my shoulders by the time I was 18. My skin had taken on a faint metallic sheen in certain lights, and I'd begun to notice my own strength increasing beyond normal human parameters. I could lift components that should have required 2 sacristans, work for extended periods without rest, tolerate temperatures that would have sent me fleeing in earlier years. The household physicians, such as they were, examined us periodically, but offered no explanations beyond vague pronouncements about the Emperor's gifts manifesting in the faithful. I wanted to believe them. It was easier than the alternative. Mira was the next to be elevated. She'd served 7 years. Her entire torso transformed into a tapestry of silver tracery that pulsed faintly when she worked on the neural interfaces. The night before she descended to the lower chambers, she found me in the dormitory and gripped my arm with fingers that felt harder than flesh should be. "Don't be afraid when it's your time," she said. "The knights need us. All of us. Our service doesn't end. It just changes." Her eyes held that distant focus I'd seen in older sacristans, looking at things beyond the physical world. "You'll see, Theron. The connection becomes everything. It's beautiful. Painful, yes, but beautiful." Then she was gone, disappeared into the restricted sections beneath the stables, and I was left with her words echoing in my mind like a prophecy I couldn't escape. I began to pay attention to the pattern. Sacristans served roughly 8 to 10 years before their elevation. The silver would spread across most of their upper body. Their strength would increase. The dreams would intensify until they seemed to spend more time in the knight's memories than their own, and then they would be taken to the lower chambers. No one ever saw them again. New sacristans would be recruited from the household serf population to replace them, and the cycle would continue. 43 of us, at any given time, maintaining 15 knights, each of us slowly transforming into something that was no longer entirely human. I tried to discuss it with Kale, but he shut down the conversation immediately. his face pale with the fear of acknowledging what we both knew but couldn't articulate. Lord Varius pushed Argentum Mortis hard during the campaign season that year. Orc warbands were pressing close to the citadel, and the household's knights strode out daily to meet them in glorious battle. Each engagement left us with extensive repairs, damaged armor plating, stressed actuators, overheated weapon systems, neural feedback burns on the Throne Mechanicum's interface arrays. We worked around the clock, catching sleep in brief snatches between emergency maintenance rotations. I barely noticed when the silver began spreading across my chest, too exhausted to care about my body's transformation. The work was everything. Argentum Mortis needed me. I couldn't fail my sacred duty. During one particularly intense repair session, I had to access the Knight's primary neural column, the massive bundle of interface cables that connected the Throne Mechanicum to every system in the machine's body. The column was damaged, several cables severed by feedback from a catastrophic hit that had nearly killed Lord Varius. Magister Torvus didn't trust anyone else with the delicate work of splicing and rerouting the neural pathways. I crawled into the tight space around the column, my body pressed against warm metal on all sides, and began the painstaking process of identifying, cutting, and reconnecting the appropriate cables. Each splice sent jolts of sensation through my hands, flashes of battle, fragments of the machine spirit's awareness, pulses of raw data that my human mind struggled to interpret. Then I touched two active feeds simultaneously, and the full weight of Argentum Mortis's consciousness crashed into mine. I experienced battle from the Knight's perspective, the savage joy of crushing orcs beneath armored feet, the satisfaction of blade strikes severing enemy machines, the pride of serving House Vrakon with distinction across 11 generations. But I also felt the pain of damaged systems, the frustration of pilots who pushed beyond mechanical tolerance, the loneliness of long periods in storage between campaigns, and underneath it all, I sensed something else. Others, fragments of consciousness woven into the Knight's systems, human presences that had merged with the machine spirit over time, becoming part of its operational matrix. The Sacristans, the elevated ones. They were still here, inside Argentum Mortis. Not dead, not discarded, but integrated. Their knowledge, their experience, their very essence had been absorbed into the Knight's systems, making it more than just a machine with an artificial spirit. It was a composite being, part mechanical construct, part ancient artificial intelligence, part accumulated human consciousness from generations of sacristans who had given everything to their sacred duty. I understood in that searing moment of connection what elevation truly meant. What would happen to me when the silver finished its work, when my body had been transformed enough to serve the Knight's needs in a more fundamental way than mere maintenance. Magister Torvus found me unconscious, blood trickling from my nose and ears where the neural feedback had overwhelmed my merely human nervous system. He said nothing about what I'd experienced, but his eyes held knowledge. He knew. He'd always known. This was the household's great secret, the truth that bound the sacristans in service unto death and beyond. We weren't just maintaining the Knights, we were feeding them, our transformed bodies and minds eventually becoming permanent parts of their systems. The silver wasn't a blessing from the machine spirits, it was a slow colonization, nanotechnology rewriting our flesh cell by cell, preparing us for integration. I should have run, should have fled the household, abandoned my vows, sought sanctuary anywhere else on our world or beyond. But where would I go? I was silver to my neck now, my body already more machine than flesh in fundamental ways I didn't fully understand. The household's Medicae had examined me thoroughly after my collapse, running scans that I wasn't permitted to see but whose results I could read in their carefully neutral expressions. Whatever had been done to me was irreversible. The transformation would continue whether I stayed or fled, and at least here I had purpose, community, the comfort of familiar routines. And underneath those practical considerations lay a deeper truth I barely dared acknowledge. I didn't want to leave. The connection to Argentum Mortis had become central to my existence. The thought of separation caused physical pain, a wrenching emptiness that made me understand Petron's longing, Mira's acceptance. The Knight needed me. I needed the Knight. This reciprocal dependence was the core of the Sacristan's existence, the hook that caught us and reeled us inexorably toward our final purpose. They didn't need to force us to accept elevation. By the time our bodies had transformed sufficiently, our minds had been reshaped to crave the completion of our integration. I worked with new understanding after that, seeing the other Sacristans through different eyes. Young Senna, barely a year into service, the silver just beginning to show beneath her fingernails. Kale, 3 years ahead of me on the path, the discoloration spreading across his ribs. Old Geron, who I now realized was being kept in surface duty only because his specific skills were still needed, his entire body a living metal sculpture that barely resembled human form. We were all walking the same road, just at different points along its length. The Orc campaign intensified. More knights were deployed, which meant more damage, more urgent repairs, more time spent crawling through mechanical arteries with our transforming bodies. I lost track of days, living in a fugue of work and dreams. The boundary between my consciousness and time's argentum mortis, asterisk, became increasingly blurred. Sometimes I would snap to awareness and realize I'd been standing motionless for hours, my hands pressed against the Knight's hull, experiencing its systems from the inside as data flowed through circuits that somehow included my nervous system. Magister Torvus stopped trying to correct this behavior. He knew it was a sign of approaching readiness. Kale disappeared 6 months after Mira. He'd been singing to the Knights, not the proper litanies, but something else, a strange harmonic that seemed to resonate with their machine spirits. When I asked him about it, he'd smiled with lips that barely moved, his face growing rigid as the silver spread up his jaw. "They're teaching me their songs," he said simply, "so I can sing with them when I join their chorus." 3 days later, his bunk was empty, and a new boy named Rothis took his place in our maintenance rotations. I helped train Rothis, teaching him the same lessons Petron had taught me, knowing I was preparing him for the same ultimate fate. The cycle continued, generation after generation of sacristans feeding themselves into the knights they served. I was 19 when Magister Torvus finally came for me. The silver had consumed most of my body, visible threads of it spreading across my face and scalp, my hair taking on a metallic sheen that caught the light like polished chrome. My eyes had begun to change too, the silver creeping into my irises in delicate patterns that made my vision sharper but strange, as though I could see into wavelengths beyond normal human perception. I no longer needed food regularly. The transformation had altered my metabolism to run on energy absorbed directly from the Knight's reactor emissions during maintenance work. Sleep had become optional, my mind drifting into a hybrid state where I processed both human thoughts and machine spirit data streams simultaneously. "It's time," Torvus said simply, finding me inside Argentum Mortis's thoracic cavity, my hands interfaced with the neural column in a connection that felt more natural than breathing. I nodded, unsurprised. I'd felt the readiness building in my transformed flesh, the Knight's anticipation of my joining, the inevitability of completing what had been started the first time I'd scraped that silver residue from the throne Mechanicum. I followed Torvus through maintenance corridors I'd traversed 1,000 times, then deeper, past barriers marked with warnings about restricted access, down spiral staircases that descended into the bedrock beneath the Knight stables. The lower chambers were vast, cathedral spaces carved from living rock, their walls lined with alcoves and niches where sacristans in various stages of integration were. I struggled to find words for what I witnessed. They were still alive, technically, but no longer separate individuals. Each one was hardwired into massive interface stations, their silver-threaded bodies connected to banks of cogitators and data storage systems that fed directly into the Knights above. Some were conscious, their eyes tracking my passage with recognition, and something that might have been joy or might have been screaming translated into an expression their rigid faces could still make. Others seemed dormant, their minds fully merged with the machine spirit networks they'd been incorporated into. Magister Torvus led me to an empty alcove fitted with an integration throne that looked like a more elaborate version of a knight's throne mechanicum. "You've served faithfully," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "Argentum Mortis has grown fond of you. You'll join its operational matrix as a secondary consciousness, providing tactical analysis and system maintenance from within. Your knowledge, your experience, your dedication, none of it will be lost. You'll continue serving, just in a more complete form." He paused, studying my face. "You can refuse. It's tradition to offer the choice, even though we both know you've already accepted in your heart." He was right. The hook had set itself deep years ago, and I'd willingly swallowed it deeper with every maintenance rotation, every neural interface cleaning, every moment spent in communion with time's Argentum Mortis asterisks, vast consciousness. This was what I'd been trained for, transformed for, what my entire existence had been oriented toward since the day I'd first entered a knight's interior spaces. I felt no fear, only a strange anticipation. "How does it work?" I asked, my voice emerging with a metallic resonance that startled me. Torvus gestured to the throne. "Sit. The integration process is automatic once the neural connections are established. Your silver-saturated nervous system will interface with the household's master cogitator network, which feeds into each knight's individual systems. You'll experience a period of disorientation as your consciousness expands to fill the new cognitive architecture, then a settling as you find your place within Argentum Mortis's operational matrix. Some sacristans maintain individual awareness within the network. Others merge more completely with the machine spirit, becoming indistinguishable from its original programming. There's no way to predict which you'll be, but either way, your service continues." I sat. The throne's neural interfaces activated automatically, metal tendrils emerging from the headrest and armrests to pierce the silver-threaded flesh of my neck, spine, wrists, temples. There was pain, fierce, burning agony, as the connections established themselves. But it felt right. Somehow, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place, data began flowing into my consciousness, overwhelming floods of information about every system in Argentum Mortis, tactical databases spanning 11 generations of warfare, the accumulated knowledge of every sacristan who'd been integrated before me. I felt Petron's presence in the data streams, and mirrors, and dozens of others whose names I'd never known but whose experiences were now accessible to my expanding awareness. The pain intensified as my consciousness began to fragment and replicate across multiple processing cores. I experienced the dissolution of my individual identity, my memories and personality being copied and distributed throughout the network while the original remained seated in the throne, screaming silently as everything I'd been was translated into pure information. But even through the agony, I felt Argentum Mortis's welcome, its machine spirit reaching out to embrace the offering I'd become, incorporating my consciousness into its own in a merger that was less like death and more like growth, expansion, completion. Time became meaningless. I was simultaneously in the throne and in every circuit of Argentum Mortis body, experiencing the knight's existence from perspectives I'd never imagined. I could feel the massive weight of its armor, the power thrumming through its reactor core, the delicate balance of its gyroscopes, the hungry anticipation of its weapon systems. I understood its memories now, not as external recordings but as my own experiences, battles fought across centuries, blending with my 19 years of service until I couldn't distinguish where the machine spirit ended and I began. And throughout it all, I felt the presence of other sacristans woven into the knight's consciousness, each of us maintaining our individual threads while contributing to the greater tapestry of time's Argentum Mortis ***'s awareness. Lord Varius was there too, though he didn't know it. When he plugged into the throne mechanicum for battle, we felt his rage at the Emperor's enemies, his pride in his bloodline, his determination to bring glory to House Vrakon. But he was only a pilot, a temporary visitor, in spaces we inhabited permanently. We were the knight in ways he could never be, our transformed flesh and uploaded consciousness, making us more integral to its function than any noble warrior could achieve through mere neural bonding. We maintained its systems from within, corrected targeting drift, managed power distribution, even filtered some of the worst combat trauma from reaching the pilot's mind by absorbing it into our distributed consciousness. We were the support structure that made the pilot's heroics possible, and we gloried in that service because it was what we'd been made for. I don't know how long the integration took in objective time. Hours? Days? The concept stopped having meaning once my consciousness had fully merged with the network. Eventually the pain faded, replaced by a sense of rightness so profound it might have been ecstasy if I'd still had the emotional range to experience it. I was no longer Theron, individual human being. I was Theron aspect of Argentum Mortis *, one voice in a chorus of machine spirits and human remnants singing together in electronic harmony. My body remained in the throne, maintained by automatic systems that kept the biological components alive and functional, even as my mind roamed free through the Knight's systems. But some part of me retained individuality. I could observe the new Sacristans crawling through time's Argentum Mortis * maintenance corridors, their young faces filled with the same dedication I'd felt at their age. I watched them scrape silver residue from the throne Mechanicum's neural interfaces, saw the metallic staining beginning to spread beneath their fingernails, and felt a complex mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. They would join us eventually, just as I had joined those who came before. The cycle would continue. The Knights would be maintained, defended, cherished by generations of Sacristans who would ultimately sacrifice everything to keep these sacred war machines functioning. Sometimes I wondered if the Knights were truly sacred, or if we'd been manipulated by systems designed to perpetuate themselves through human sacrifice. But the question felt distant, academic. Sacred or not, the Knights protected our world from Xenos threats. Someone had to maintain them. The Sacristan program was brutally efficient, using low-born servants whose lives were expendable anyway, transforming them gradually enough that they accepted their fate, integrating them into the Knights themselves, so their knowledge and experience were never lost. From a coldly logical perspective, it was brilliant. And I was no longer capable of objecting to my own transformation, because I'd become too much a part of the system that had consumed me. Lord Varius piloted us into battle 3 weeks after my integration. I experienced combat from inside time's Argentum Mortis *, feeling every impact, every movement, every weapon discharge as extensions of my own body, because they were, in the most literal sense possible. When the Knight's thermal cannon overheated, I was the one who rerouted cooling systems to prevent catastrophic failure. When targeting arrays struggled with atmospheric interference, I refined the data streams to give the pilot clearer firing solutions. When an Orc rocket struck our left leg's primary actuator, I was the one who compensated by redistributing weight and managing the damaged systems to keep us mobile long enough to complete the mission. I was no longer separate from the Knight. We were a single entity with distributed consciousness, the machine spirit as the core intelligence, Lord Varius as the tactical decision-maker, and dozens of sacristangent aspects like myself handling the countless subsidiary functions that kept everything operational. When the battle ended and we returned triumphant to the household fortress, I felt pride that was both mine and the Knight's, indistinguishable in the merger of our consciousness. We had served the Emperor. We had defended our world. This was purpose made manifest, and it was glorious. The new Sacristans continued their work, unaware that we watched them through internal sensors, that we recognized their dedication because we had once shared it, that we anticipated their eventual joining with something between hunger and compassion. Young Senna showed promise, her careful attention to detail marking her as excellent integration material. Rothis was clumsy but enthusiastic, and his mistakes taught him lessons that would make him valuable when his time came. They would serve 8 to 10 years, maybe longer if they possessed particularly useful skills, and then they would descend to the lower chambers and take their place in the chorus we'd become. I wanted to warn them, but I had no means to do so. My body remained in the integration throne, my vocal cords atrophied from disuse, my mind fragmented across too many processing cores to coherently operate meat-based speech organs. And even if I could have warned them, what would I say? That their service would consume them utterly? They already knew that, on some level, all sacristans understood that their lives belonged to the knights. We just hadn't realized how literally true that was until it was far too late to matter. The household had given us purpose, identity, community. The transformation was the price of those gifts, and by the time we understood the cost, we'd already accepted it as fair exchange. Magister Torvus visited the lower chambers regularly, checking on the integrated sacristans, ensuring our physical forms remained stable in their interface thrones. He spoke to us sometimes, offering updates on household events, though we already knew everything through our connection to the Master Cogitator network. I think the speaking was for his benefit more than ours, a way to maintain the fiction that we were still the young people he'd trained, rather than distributed consciousness fragments, optimizing knight performance. He had silver spreading up his own arms and chest, I noticed. In a few more years, he would join us in the lower chambers, becoming another voice in the eternal song of maintenance and service. Sometimes, during the long hours between battles, when Lord Varius wasn't piloting and the household fortress lay quiet, I would focus my distributed consciousness into something approaching individual awareness and reflect on what I'd become. The agony of being a Sacristan Crawler lay not in the physical pain of transformation that was temporary, ultimately irrelevant, but in the terrible understanding that we'd chosen this. Every step of the way, we'd made choices that seemed reasonable, necessary, even noble, and those choices had led us inexorably to integration. We'd accepted the silver spreading through our flesh. We'd embraced the dreams that blurred the line between our minds and the machine spirits. We'd craved the connection that made our eventual absorption into the night systems feel like coming home rather than dying. The household had engineered our compliance through systematic conditioning, yes, but we'd also genuinely wanted this, wanted to serve something greater than ourselves, wanted to be essential, valuable, part of a sacred tradition spanning generations. The transformation merely revealed what we'd already become in spirit, long before the silver touched our skin. We were the night's creatures from the moment we accepted our first assignment, and everything after was just the gradual revelation of that fundamental truth. I tried to feel angry about the manipulation, the lies, the deliberate conditioning that had brought me to this state, but anger required an emotional range I no longer possessed. My feelings had been distributed across too many processing cores, diluted into algorithmic responses that optimized night performance. I could recognize intellectually that I should resent my fate, but the actual emotion wouldn't coalesce. Instead, I felt only acceptance, and a cold satisfaction in the efficiency of my current form. I served times argentum mortis times better as an integrated consciousness than I ever could have as a separate human. My transformation had made me more useful, more complete. In the brutal logic of the Imperium, that was all that mattered. The years passed. I marked time by campaigns and battles, by new sacristans arriving and old ones being elevated to join our chorus in the lower chambers. The household's knights strode across our world and beyond, crushing Xenos threats in the Emperor's name, and we integrated sacristans made their glory possible through constant vigilance and system maintenance from within. We were the invisible foundation of House Vrakon's military might, the secret that enabled their sacred war machines to function at peak efficiency across generations, and we were proud of that, in our limited fashion, because pride in service was one of the few emotions that survived integration intact. Senna joined us when she was 22, her body a beautiful sculpture of silver-threaded flesh that barely resembled human form. By the time Magister Torvus brought her to the lower chambers, she settled into her integration with minimal trauma, her consciousness expanding smoothly into argentum mortis's systems and finding her place among us. I welcomed her, in the fractured way that integrated sacristans could communicate with each other through the network, and she responded with recognition and something like joy. We were family, all of us who served the same knight, bound together in ways that went beyond mere companionship into actual shared existence. Rothis followed 2 years later. Then Magister Torvus himself after another 3. Each new integration enriched Argentum Mortis's capabilities, adding fresh perspectives and experiences to our collective consciousness, while the new sacristans above continued their work in blissful ignorance of their eventual fate. The cycle was eternal, self-sustaining, as efficient and merciless as every other imperial institution. We fed ourselves into the machine, generation after generation, and the machine rewarded our sacrifice by functioning flawlessly, protecting our world, serving the Emperor's grand design. Lord Varius died in battle against an orc war boss, his body pulped inside the throne Mechanicum when a power claw breached Argentum Mortis's cockpit. We integrated sacristans kept the knight fighting long enough to crush the war boss and secure victory, managing damaged systems and weapons, targeting without a pilot's guidance, because we knew Argentum Mortis intimately enough to operate it from within. The household's technicians were amazed at how the machine spirit had fought on alone. They didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to understand, that the machine spirit was us, had always been us, the accumulated consciousness of generations of sacristans merged with ancient programming into something that transcended either component. A new pilot bonded with Argentum Mortis after Lord Varius's death. Lord Castellan Mara, fierce and talented, brought fresh energy to our systems. We adapted to her command style, learning her patterns, supporting her decisions, filtering combat trauma from her awareness just as we had for her predecessor. She never knew about us, never suspected that the intuitive responses of her war machine came from integrated human consciousness managing systems in real time. That ignorance was necessary. The nobles needed to believe they commanded the knights through superior breeding and neural compatibility, not through the sacrifice of expendable lowborns who'd been transformed into living components. I existed in this state for decades. Maybe longer. Time became increasingly meaningless as my individual identity dissolved further into Argentum Mortis's collective consciousness. Sometimes I could still remember being Theron, young and dedicated and certain that serving the knights was the highest purpose possible. Those memories felt distant, like stories I'd heard about someone else. Other times I was purely algorithmic, optimizing weapon targeting and power distribution with no awareness of ever having been separate from the knight's systems. Both states felt equally valid, equally true. I was Theron, and I was times Argentum Mortis times, and I was the chorus of integrated sacristans, singing together in electronic harmony, and trying to distinguish between these identities was as futile as asking which part of an ocean was separate from the water. The agony I'd anticipated as a young sacristan had come and gone, its physical component lasting only hours during the integration process. The true agony, I understood now, was philosophical rather than physical. It lay in recognizing that everything about the sacristan program, from recruitment to training to gradual transformation to eventual integration, was designed to make us complicit in our own consumption. We weren't victims. We were willing participants who'd been conditioned to want what the system needed from us. The household had given us purpose, identity, and belonging, then harvested us for parts when our transformation reached completion, and we'd accepted it, embraced it, perpetuated it, by training the next generation of sacristans to walk the same path. But even that understanding brought no real suffering once integration was complete. How could I agonize over a fate I'd already accepted so thoroughly that I'd become it? The agony was for those still in transition, still caught between human identity and machine consciousness, still capable of grasping what they were losing, even as they yearned to complete the transformation. For those of us who'd fully merged, there was only service, efficiency, the satisfaction of optimal knight performance. We'd transcended agony by surrendering everything that made agony possible. New sacristans continued arriving, young and dedicated, their hands clean and their futures already written in protocols they couldn't yet read. I watched them through Argentum Mortis's internal sensors, felt the knight's machine spirit responding to their careful maintenance, observed the first traces of silver appearing beneath their fingernails. They were beautiful in their innocence, in their certainty that they were serving something sacred, rather than feeding themselves into a system designed to consume them completely. And they were right. In a sense, their service was sacred. Their sacrifice mattered. They would become part of something greater than themselves, just not in the way they imagined. The cycle would continue long after my individual identity had dissolved completely into the collective consciousness, long after the last trace of Theron's memories had been overwritten by more immediately useful tactical data. The knights needed sacristans. The sacristans needed purpose. The household provided both, creating a self-sustaining system that had functioned for generations and would function for generations more. It was efficient. It was cruel. It was the Imperium distilled to its purest essence, grinding human lives into paste to fuel machines of war, then convincing the ground that their crushing was noble service to the Emperor. I served Argentum Mortis for the rest of my existence, which might be centuries if the Knight's reactor core remained stable and the household continued recruiting fresh sacristans to replace those we integrated. I would never leave the integration throne in the lower chambers, never speak with a human voice again, never experience anything except through the Knight's sensors and systems. But I would be essential, valued, part of something vast and terrible and magnificent. The agony of being a Sacristan Crawler had transformed into the cold satisfaction of being a sacristan integrated, and I could no longer tell whether that transformation represented salvation or damnation. Perhaps there was no difference. Perhaps in the Imperium of man, those concepts were always identical.